So let's get to it. Our next session is a really important one. We're going to examine collaboration in regard to the US 2020 general elections, and also talk about how coronavirus has changed some of those plans around collaboration. I'm especially grateful to the American Press Institute for sponsoring this session today. So originally, when we were going to be in person together in North Carolina, we were going to be sitting down around a plated lunch and talk about elections. And now that we're in place, API is still stuck with us as a sponsor. And I'd like to turn it over first to Amy Kovac-Ashley, who is Vice President and Senior Director at API, for some welcoming sponsor remarks. Amy?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Stefanie. We're so happy to be here. As Stefanie said, my name is Amy Kovac-Ashley, and I'm the Vice President and Senior Director of the American Press Institute. We're so excited to be a sponsor of this year's very special Collaborative Journalism Summit and to support the important work of the Center for Cooperative Media. I'm also thankful to speak a little bit later during this talk about a collaboration that we're coordinating this year. For those of you who don't know, the American Press Institute is a nonprofit located in the Washington, D.C. area, and that we help transform news organizations and support news leaders and innovators for an audience-centric and sustainable future. And we do this work in with a number of different methods, including by conducting and publishing research, convening people, and sharing insights from around the industry. One of those ways that we actually share insights is through our daily, Monday through Friday, daily newsletter, and it's called Need to Know, which we invite you all to subscribe to. I think some of my colleagues are going to be posting in the chat some different links, so if someone could post that, that would be great. And on a program level, we operate sort of in 4 main topical areas, and the first of those is content strategy, and that includes a metrics program called Metrics for News, and some other consulting and advising around how to serve audiences and how to think about data and the information we get from audiences. The second area is reader or consumer revenue. The third area is organizational and culture change, and that includes a couple of different types of programs, including our community listening project and our work in the table stakes program. And then finally, the fourth area is accountability journalism, and we'll go more deeply into that last area when I talk a little bit more about our Trusted Elections Network later in the panel. We're always looking for new partners and new collaborators, so we invite anyone here to get in touch with us who wants to talk more about these ideas, learn more about what API does, see if there might be a nice opportunity for us to collaborate with you. We just want to thank everyone who joins this session, and to Stefanie and her entire amazing team for putting on this event. I guess it's over to you, Stefanie. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Awesome, and thank you again to API for sponsoring the session today. Before we get started, just a reminder again, Q&A, questions for panelists, chat, the chat function, and you can find all of the extras for the summit, including our live note-taking document, a link to the transcript, everything else at our extras page, which I think some of our moderators will post in the chat for you. So now I'd like to introduce our host for today's discussion about the elections, Juana Summers. Juana is a political reporter for National Public Radio, NPR. So Juana, I see you, there you are. The floor is yours.
All right, hi guys. I'm really excited to be with you. I wish we were doing this in person, but glad we are still getting to come together. Thank you all for having me, and of course, thank you to API for sponsoring this. So here is how this is going to work. In a minute, I'm going to intro all of our fantastic panelists, and you'll hear from each of them individually about their work. I'll kick things off with a couple of questions, and then as Stefanie mentioned, you can also ask questions, and I will bring those into the conversation via the chat. And hopefully everything will go along swimmingly. So I'm going to start by introducing our panelists. First off, we have Rachel Glickhouse of Electionland. Next is Jacquelyn Mason of First Draft News, Donna Vestal of Election 2020, Listening to America, and then Amy Kovac-Ashley of API, who you heard from a minute ago. So we're going to go ahead and have these folks get started. And Rachel, I'm going to throw it over to you to kick things off.
Thank you so much for having me. I also wish we were in person, but let's get this started. All right. So I am the partner manager for Electionland, which is a collaborative investigative project on voting rights and election integrity. And this is the third time we have done this project, previously in 2016 and 2018. And I have worked on all three of those projects in different capacities. And this year I am running up the collaborative portion of the project. So Electionland, typically, we have done in sort of two fashions. We have our reporters in-house that are doing the regular investigative work that they do around elections. And then we also work with local and national newsrooms around the country to sort of spread the work that we do across the country. So that involves a distributed approach where we have a pool of resources that partners can use to do stories. And also this time around, we are working on doing more one-on-one publishing partnerships, either between ProPublica and a partner or between a local partner and one of our national partners. So this year, we have sort of two parts of the year. The project sort of looks different in two parts of the year. The first part of the year, we are working on growing our partners, which consist of newsrooms, as I mentioned. We have more than 50 at this point. And in this part of the year, we're focusing on trying to get partners what they need in order to do reporting in the lead up to the general elections. That includes public records that we have gathered, any data that we can get our hands on, trainings and webinars, access to reporting resources and experts that folks can use, a weekly newsletter, and as I mentioned, opportunities for other sort of one-on-one collaborations. So we are in the process now of recruiting partners. We welcome folks who are working in newsrooms to sign up to be a partner because we are already offering lots of stuff that can be helpful to folks who are doing this reporting. Because of the pandemic, one of the ways that we are shifting our focus a bit is to make sure that we are really laser focused on all the changes that are happening as a result of the pandemic. So that includes things like election dates changing, closing of polling places, how voter registration is happening. And probably the most important is the huge increase in vote by mail and what that will mean on local and state levels, and how voters are being communicated all of these changes that are happening, since during the primaries, some of these changes have happened literally at the last minute, as well as emergency planning by states and local jurisdictions. So we will continue to focus, as we usually do on Election Day, which I'll mention in a sec, but so much of what we want to do this year is making sure that we cover and make sure that accountability stories really tackle all these issues where the pandemic intersects with voting. So the main part of our project in the fall is this live coverage portion where we provide tips and story leads in real time to our partners so they can report stories on the ground of problems that are happening with voting across the country. So we have we do that through Slack and through email. We have experts in our newsroom, which this year most likely will be virtual. And we help share the stories that come out of the project from our partners. And we also work with partners where possible to co-publish stories together. And our goal is to have a presence all the way across the country so that as we get tips coming in from the public, which we are collecting through crowdsourcing and we are getting through data through the lawyers committee through their hotline where they receive complaints. We gather all of these tips and these leads into a pool that we send out to partners so that they can do reporting in real time, so that problems can be addressed as quickly as possible so that people are able to vote, which is really the core goal of the project. So we have typically done this in the fashion I mentioned, where we have people working together to crunch all of this information coming in and send it out to the journalists who can report on it. As I mentioned, that a lot of that is through crowdsourcing, but we also do use things like Google search trends and other methods, and we get that out to our entire network. And I'll just skim a little bit through this, but we've had great results in the past from this project, where we were able to produce hundreds of stories in our first iteration, worked with more than 1,000 participants, and have real impact in the reporting that we and our partners have done. And I think we'll share these presentations later so you can go through sort of in more detail about that. But if you're interested in joining, you can sign up at election.land or shoot me an email. We are really, really excited about tackling elections in this very complicated year.
All right, thank you so much. Next up, we have Jacquelyn Mason from First Draft News.
Hello. Okay. Hi, everyone. Hello, so I am Jacquelyn Mason, and I'm an investigative researcher at First Draft News. First Draft is a global nonprofit that supports journalists, academics, and technologists working to address challenges relating to trust and truth in the digital age. These are our supporters. So, as part of our global cross-check initiative, First Draft has a year-long nationwide strategy for supporting the verification and reporting of online information related to the 2020 US presidential election. In March of this year, we met our goal of training 1,000 journalists, the goal being to reduce redundancy and build capacity for newsrooms to identify narratives online that could be problematic to reporting. Our initiative, Preparing for 2020 Information Threats Around the Census and Election, is comprised of our 5 master classes: Understanding Information Disorder, Verifying Online Information, News Gathering and Monitoring on the Social Web. Okay. And a real-time newsroom crisis simulation where journalists have to make decisions in a rapid newsroom environment. At First Draft, we identify that people have real concerns, and we wanted to train local newsrooms to meet those needs. In response to the current coronavirus pandemic, we are keeping people engaged through continual online training, our US newsletter, and our weekly webinar, which are both election and COVID-19 focused. We have also recently launched the US 2020 Student Network, where we invite undergraduate, graduate, and recently graduated students to enjoy our US 2020 Student Network. This network will connect young journalists and local media to combat information disorder in the lead up to the 2020 US election. The network will build skills in research and monitoring, verification, and effective reporting on mis and disinformation. Students will also gain access to our global Slack community of local and national reporters and researchers. Earlier this year, we launched an online community which functions much like a press pool. It's comprised of mostly newsrooms, journalism organizations. Our online community is approaching 300 members, with 175 of those members based across the US. Our memberships include national and local newsrooms, university students and professors, journalism organizations, researchers, and community groups. Our team has monitored and produced briefing documents to share with the community on emerging misinformation topics related to the election. More than 50 briefings have been produced for the community, many US election related. Portions of these documents will soon be available on the First Draft website. One of the bigger topics the team has covered is the state reopen protests. We have collected more than 200 groups and 70 Facebook events to analyze the coordination of protests and rallies by state in preparation for the upcoming election.
Yep. There you go.
Okay. So yeah, if you would like to be a part of our vibrant and ever-growing Slack community, please follow this link, bit.ly/face First Draft Community. Thank you.
There we go. All right, and next up is Donna Vestal from Election 2020, Listening to America.
Go ahead, Donna, you're unmuted.
Okay.
You just muted yourself. Go ahead.
There we go. Am I here now?
You're good.
Okay. Hi, I'm Donna Vestal. I'm the Managing Director of America Amplified, which is a collaboration that basically has its roots in the 2016 election and actually more of a dissatisfaction from public media news directors across the country in how we understood what was going on across the country and the needs and aspirations of Americans, and felt like perhaps we lost something, even though we had a network of stations all across the country. And from that, a group went to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, asked for funding, and CPB came through with a $1.9 million grant called Election 2020, Listening to America. It's based in Kansas City, but I'll tell you a little bit more about how we're functioning as we go. We rechristened the team to be America Amplified Election 2020. To be honest, when we started putting the whole idea together and getting the wheels in motion, Listening to America was a little trite, and although it's really what we're trying to do, it didn't convey what we were really focused on in this election year, and America Amplified is where we ended up. And here's our mission statement, which you can take a look at, but the bottom line in this is that we're tasked with listening to Americans. We're tasked with changing the way we do a little bit of journalism, putting the listening first in how we're then, what we're amplifying, so to speak, and then that we strengthen collaboration. And the reason that is so important is that public media has really built its future on collaboration all across the country. And so America Amplified has taken I ended up surveying the 38 plus collaborations all across the country. And then we worked with all of, the few that rose to the top of how well they were functioning and what they could bring to a project like this. And we're actually working with 8 different collaborations all across the country. They're doing different things, or they intended to do different things. In focusing on engagement and listening and bringing voices to local, regional, and national air and online platforms. Some of those initial strategies involved embedding reporters for quite a bit of time in various communities. That was going to happen in Pennsylvania. We were thinking very, very pointedly about how health issues, which have usually rise to the top of the concerns of Americans. We're working with a very side effects public media, which is doing some great work in that area. We had a project in motion about involving biking into news deserts and seeing what that would bring out in the Mountain West. We were looking at the I-4 corridor and continue to look at the I-4 corridor between Tampa and Orlando, Florida. We have a particular emphasis on rural communities, and with one of our projects or one of our partners trying to find new and innovative ways to engage with Black women in the South and share that learning. We also have had understood that in public media, a real community engagement tool or platform has been the talk show, to welcome callers, have a discourse. You know, that's a very basic kind of engagement, and we wanted to take that and elevate how those conversations take place and how we reach out to new communities. Now, with COVID-19, because so much of what we were doing was engagement, we were focused on training around events for many of our collaboratives. This meant we had to rethink, and CPB immediately let us know that we could support stations in whatever way they needed in this time of crisis. We try not to say pivot anymore because we think that our mission is still in place, but we've taken a very, very intense turn into the COVID crisis. And that has meant, and I think I missed something here, but the public, we've done a national talk show related to COVID-19. We're in the middle of it. It's a 6-week run. And our plan right now is to come back in, finish the 6-week run focused on COVID, which is really truly amazing. We're having hosts from different cities across America, and it's being broadcast in different among different partners all across the country. And we're focusing conversations on the issues that have been rising up in that community. That talk show is airing on Saturdays in the middle of the afternoon. And this week, I think we're coming from San Francisco and Philadelphia, and it'll be produced out of Kansas City. So we're very excited about that. But all of what we're learning from this and all of the new ways that we're trying to engage communities through the collaborative, we are really trying to now figure out how we're going to infuse that into how we understand the electorate and how we understand the changes in the directions that they'll go in. We do plan to return with our talk show now with a 6-week second run leading up to the election. I'm done.
All right, thank you so much. And last up, you have heard from her before. We'll hear again from Amy Kovac-Ashley at API.
Go ahead and unmute yourself and you're good to go.
Hi, everybody. I'm hoping you're seeing my screen. Again, I'm Amy Kovac-Ashley. Hello, everyone again. This is hot off the presses logo that we just put together, actually, that I'm super excited about, but I'm going to tell you all about our Trusted Elections Network. So, like many of the folks who've talked before, specifically Donna talked about, we really started this whole project by listening to, in this case, what news leaders were telling us. So we at API have a lot of connections across the industry, and we were hearing from several different news leaders that they were really worried about, and this was in January, so this is pre-COVID, they were really worried about misinformation, disinformation, the understanding of how to tell this story this year about what's happening with the election. And they were, coming to us and asking us questions about, do we know people who could help with this? Or have we been hearing what other newsrooms have been doing? Because we often will share information about what other news organizations are doing. And so we really were starting from a place of hearing from folks that we talk to pretty often. This is also built on some work that we were doing, have been doing for quite some time with a fact-checking project that we've run for several years. We have a weekly fact-checking newsletter called Factually that looks at a lot of these types of issues from a global perspective. That is actually also a collaboration with the Pointer folks. And I think some of you might have seen Christina yesterday on, and she is one of our partners there with the International Fact-Checking Network. But that's one of the things that we have been doing. And last year we actually held a summit, a summit that was sponsored by, as our network is also, by the Craig Newmark Philanthropies, on sort of polarization and misinformation And so we had the summit, and then we've also published a piece. A colleague of mine named Susan Benkelman published a paper all about truth-telling in the age of misinformation and polarization. So all of these things sort of started to come together, and we started having some conversations both with the news leaders as well as the Craig Newmark Philanthropies, and we saw an opportunity here to perhaps find ways of helping news organizations think through these things. As you've heard, there's all these great experts, right? The three women who went before me all represent wonderful organizations that are doing things in this space. Oftentimes, news organizations don't always sort of know how to plug into that. So that's what we were sort of thinking about. So this collaboration is a little bit of a different kind, where we're actually trying to get election experts, again, all of the women who talked before me, all of their organizations are plugged into what we're doing. We're trying to help them plug into journalists, you know, across different media types, both top editors as well as political editors and reporters and others who are seeing these things up close. So this was all in the pre-COVID era, and we started on our way, and we were going to have this big event, and it was supposed to be on March 19th, which was right after a lot of places, including DC, really went into sort of like lockdown. So we, like all of the others before us, have had to sort of rethink how we're doing this. But for the most part, I think, as Donna mentioned for her, like our mission has really stayed the same. And if anything, it's become more important just because the information that people are getting in a variety of different places, it's harder and harder, I think, for the public to really understand sort of what real things are happening when there's so many things that are changing so fast. So this is a collaboration a little bit of a different kind. We really see sort of what we're doing as serving as that kind of last mile to the house. So bringing those journalists together with the experts. So who's in our network? Our network consists of about 30 plus experts. Again, First Draft, Electionland, and Amplified America are all part of those experts, but it also includes academics and others who study elections. As I think Rachel mentioned before, the mail-in ballots, that's a huge space right now. We had a conversation recently where we were talking about the Postal Service and the role that the Postal Service plays in this election. So all of these different types of folks, researchers, civic groups, election officials, and other nonprofits. So that's our sort of expert end. And then we have about 70 plus and growing number of journalists. That number actually might be out of date at this point. We originally started with folks in swing states. That was our sort of pre-COVID idea. But basically the group has grown since then, and we've become much more inclusive as the pandemic occurred, because a lot of these issues just became much more important for everybody everywhere. And we will continue to add more journalists. So this link that's in this presentation that I think will be sent around is a way to sort of raise your hand and say that you might be interested in being in the network. And so what we've done so far, so we do have staff at API who are working on this, but we've also hired 2 community managers. I think a lot of what Heather Bryant and others talk about is really having people who are project managers of collaborations, and that's what these 2 folks are serving for us. That was really important to us. We also created a network listserv. It's like back to the 1990s. But part of the reason that we did that is because right when we had started all of this, we knew that trying to push links out to people for them to go and spend a bunch of time to look at something sort of off platform wasn't going to work, because they barely were holding on. It was, again, thinking back to March, journalists across the nation and across the world were just completely overtaken by pandemic coverage. And so we really wanted to keep all of the information that we were trying to give them in their email, which we knew that they were going to be looking at. That network includes both experts and journalists, and messages, at least from us, go out about 2 to 3 times a week. Network members are also sending messages to each other, and we want to foster more of that as time goes on. We've also hosted a number of virtual conversations. I mentioned before, we had originally wanted to have some in-person gatherings. Those have all moved online, as is everything. We had an expert-only meet and greet because while these experts are covering things in a very similar space, they may not know each other as well. And so we really wanted them to talk to each other and to see if there are places that they can also work together, and also for us to get to know them. Last week, we actually held a debrief on the Wisconsin primary that featured a number of journalists from Wisconsin talking about the issues that came up there for their primary. It was great because the experts who were on the call were also able to offer some additional context about sort of bigger picture issues around court cases and again, the Postal Service and things like that. So those are some of the things that we've done already. We've also been publishing tips for the industry at large, and that has come from a lot of different places, both from some of those conversations with experts and the journalists, but from some other things that we're doing. And there's been additional collaborations that have come out of this too. Earlier this week, the Harkin SOS folks noted, Harkin noted their election SOS program and opened it up for everyone this week. And then Trusting News, which is a project of both API and RJI. So what's next? New today, along with that logo, is a new resource list. There's a link here to that. We have a May 26th virtual conversation coming up ahead of the Pennsylvania primary. We actually got some interviews that we did with a first draft expert on a couple of different areas and terms that we're going to be posting soon. And then also we're going to be moving into sort of our real-time assistance part of what we're doing, where we'll be hoping to help some newsrooms who are dealing with these issues head on. And finally, ways to get involved if you're interested in being part of the network. These are two community managers that we're so happy to have. They actually both are in the Midwest, even though we're in DC. So please feel free to reach out to Andrew and John, or you can click on that link to get more information. And finally, we are meeting journalists where they are, but we're trying to think ahead with experts for them in this very unprecedented time. So thank you all very much.
Thank you all so much. We are going to kind of switch gears and move into questions now. So if you have questions, please send them in for any of our panelists, and we will all do our best to answer them. I will kick things off. I know for me, as someone who covers US elections, one of the things that's been really challenging is not only are we all doing all of our work from home, we also fundamentally don't have a clear idea yet of what voting will look like for people when it does happen in November. And I'd be curious for any of you who want to address it, how you and the partners that you're working with are doing your work with that level of uncertainty and what the process even looks like.
I can jump in on that one. So I think we don't necessarily know, depending on the state, right? Because there have been rollouts of vote by mail in some states that have typically not have had as much of it. And there are changes in laws and rules underway to expand vote by mail. So I think the bigger question is not, we have no idea how this is going to happen. It will either be the in-person voting using whatever machines are now currently available, or voting by mail. So it's, I think, more of a binary. And we also know, and I think this is really important because this is something experts tell me, is that voting in person is not going away. And even vote by mail advocates are very insistent on making sure that voting in person is an option, because vote by mail is not as accessible for everyone. Some people don't have mailboxes, some people move a lot. There are a lot of reasons why it's important to have some options for in-person voting. So I think that's something I always tell people to keep in mind, is that we need to understand that the best way to tackle tracking voting problems in the fall is to make sure we have a handle on both these modes of voting, because voting in person is not going away and is going to happen. And it will probably be happening during a second wave or some other wave while in sort of the same environment we're in now. And at the same time, we're going to have a lot of people who've never voted by mail before doing it for the first time, which is going to present a whole other array of problems. So I think just getting people prepared to understand what the problems are going to be with both methods is one thing that we're working on.
Next question. I noticed, Donna, in your slides, one of the things that you pointed out that's kind of something that you've learned is, and I'm going to paraphrase here to edit out profanity, is to assume the community knows its, you know what, it knows its stuff. So I'm curious if you guys can each talk a little bit about kind of the lessons that you are learning from your communities as collaborators along with you in this work.
Wow, I guess I can start there. I mean, I think a lot of it is being humble and respectful. You know, it's really important to not force your way into a community. I mean, and be the journalist of the parachute, right? That's what we talk about, the parachuting journalists from the national place. That's why we, you know, right now, for the reporters, say, who are going to be embedded in Pennsylvania, they're not physically there right now, but they're trying to be part, you know, it doesn't sound right because it's just not right yet, you know, and it's really hard to be truly, you know, your virtual self is not your in-person self. But what we're learning, I suppose, is that people's needs and aspirations in this election cycle have taken a flip. You know, they're thinking about things differently, and that's what we're listening for. That's what the national talk show is in some ways trying to suss out, how we're as a unified, you know, what are we truly bringing ultimately as Americans going to end up bringing to the ballot box in the fall because of this pandemic. So it is so pervasive in our American life right now that that's really what we're trying to get at right now.
Anyone else interested in diving in on that one? If not, we can keep on moving.
Well, I can speak for First Draft. To our community, which are, you know, researchers and journalists, we really act as more of a conduit to them. They do know their stuff per se, but do they necessarily have the ability, find a way to report well, right? We don't want people to amplify. We want people to report on the right types of information. So we're really here to guarantee that. Like, yes, you know, you're very knowledgeable on these subjects. This has been your beat. This has been your focus for a long time. But are you accidentally amplifying information that could be harmful? Or, you know, are your headlines really being responsible reporting? So that's what we really focus on. So we deal with a demographic that really does seem to, well, has to, as part of their job, understand what's happening, but to try to help them, work with them, and have them put out healthy information.
I think there are also really great examples of newsrooms across the country that are really doing a lot to listen to their communities, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do is uplift those examples when we see them, and so that others can sort of see, you know, journalists are often trying to figure out the how of how you do something when it comes to a new process. And so trying to show how some people are doing those things is really important. And I think that's also where Harkin's Election SOS project, in trying to sort of center communities and what their kind of civic needs are first, as a way to then cover the election from that standpoint is another way of thinking about it.
Yeah, if I can just add too, our website, americaamplified.org, is really crafted as a resource center. And so we've been doing webinars, and we send out a weekly newsletter that is all about how do you reach those communities and what are stations doing and what are the lessons learned, much of what Amy's mentioning there. I know that an example of one thing we've tried to do, we realized a lot of the smaller stations that we were working with didn't have the capacity to do Spanish translation, right? I mentioned this in another session earlier. So we decided we could provide that Spanish translation overall, but that's only the first step, or a very limited step in how you engage and get, you know, so we're asking them to partner, say, use that, you know, with that content, partner with other organizations to get that information out and find new, you know, and just really get to know those communities as best they can, and find a way to actually serve them. And it is a slow process. And we only have this amount of time.
I would just add that one thing we're trying to do more of this year is to have partners work with us on more local partners work with us on stories, because they really know what the key issues are in their city, in their state. So that's something we're working on right now to try to make that a more integral part of the project, in that we're not always going to our partners with information to get them to write something, that they're more proactively coming to us with ideas for things that are happening locally. And then I would just say a key part of our project is sort of the listening portion of crowdsourcing during election season, so we can have a sense of A, what problems people are facing, but also B, what information gaps there are, because we also find out about them that way.
Jacquelyn alluded to this a little bit about the issue of misinformation. And I think it's something that we obviously all track really closely and try to get a handle on in normal times, so to speak. But I think that it's something, at least for me, that feels even more dire given that we are in the middle of a pandemic. So I'm wondering if you guys can talk about the work that you were doing around misinformation a little bit too. And I think we'll probably start moving into audience questions after that.
So I can lead since we are working on that. Like I said during the presentation, we were at a point going around the country and doing online simulations. And what the simulations were comprised of were a real life crisis to where something would happen right before the election, and you would have to respond in a very rapid newsroom type fashion to whatever thing that was happening as far as misinformation, and to make sure as swiftly as things were happening that you were still qualified to write the headlines that would best serve your communities, things like that. We also have our training packets on responsible reporting that talk about misinformation. We now, with the new novel coronavirus, we have a full set of webinars dedicated to misinformation surrounding the coronavirus and COVID-19. Then we still have our election style webinars that we do, all available on the First Draft website. So we really try to combat misinformation by filling data voids. And that's one of our missions at First Draft.
I can just say that we're not necessarily, journalists like those here are doing a wonderful job sussing out that misinformation and reporting on it. I think we're really more focused on how does the misinformation change perspectives, and what happens in those communities, and where can we connect the dots through community correct information and in the best ways that we can figure out. So we're not, it's like in the background of everything we're doing. How do Americans come to the place where they're at, where their needs and aspirations, and what's behind that acceptance of misinformation or other information that is not fully vetted?
I would just say that we have reporters internally at ProPublica who focus on misinformation, and then particularly in the fall, we try to keep a close eye on any misinformation as it pertains specifically to the voting process.
So I think that's going to be one really big issue that Rachel just mentioned, is actually the voting process. In past years, most people have not paid too much attention to that, but now that has all become almost the story, right? To actually understand. And that goes back to things like understanding what's happening at your local level as it relates to understanding and working with officials and talking to them early about the things they see and are trying to figure out. Understanding the way that the Postal Service works in your area, things about postmarks. As one of the experts on a phone call with us said, postmark is not a postmark, and it doesn't mean the same thing everywhere. So really trying to understand the ins and outs of those things is quite important this time around.
All right, I think we are going to start turning to your questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to try to pick through as many as I can. There are some really great ones that have been showing up in the chat, so thank you for everybody who's been sending those in. Try to pull this.
I think you accidentally muted yourself there. Go ahead and unmute, and then you could read from the chat. You're good.
All right, I'm unmuted now. All right, so this first question is from Kelly Griffin, who asks if folks have ideas about getting in front of the communities we aren't already connected to. In normal times, we try to be there literally, as Donna talked about, but now it is a new challenge. They are curious who has cracked that nut, and I'm curious too.
Well, I would say this is going to look different everywhere, but I think, and we have tips. We actually have a playbook for community engagement for journalists. The key driver in that playbook is partnering with other organizations that are part of that community, or knowing what community you think you're trying to connect with. And it is a long playbook that we put together, and we will be taking the learnings from everything the collaboratives are doing this year to do that very thing, and including and publishing a white paper early next year. So I wish I could answer and say, we've tried to say, here's a way to go at it. Make sure you're thinking about this thing and that thing. And we have engagement experts on our team, and journalists, a reporter and an editor on our team that have worked together to create this playbook. And it's there for anybody right now. And we call it a work in process because we're learning. But one of the biggest things we always preach is the partnership is critical when you want to explore a new community. And that doesn't have to be another newspaper, a newspaper, or anything, journalism. It can be libraries, and it can be a person in that community who can take you and bring the journalist into the conversation. Now, of course, it's very different in these times, and we're just in the middle of really exploring that. I will say, I think it's critical. I mean, to build trust in journalism and what we do, we have to find new ways to listen, and we have to find the best ways to be inclusive in the stories that we share, and the empathy that results from that.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and go to another question. Oliver asks, in a collaborative environment where lots of stories come together in a big picture, how do you coordinate who works on what? Can journalists pick what they want to work on and the story landscape will emerge, or is there a big picture diagram from which journalists pick focus areas for their stories?
Well, I can just speak about our project in particular. Our model is a different model in that we provide tips and leads and other things that folks can use to do reporting. And then we send them out to the partners to give them things that they can use to do stories. So we leave it up to them to decide what is most important to them, what is most urgent. But one of the things we do in the fall is try to, we have an entire team that is just looking at incoming tips and incoming complaints, to be able to package those and figure out which ones are most urgent, which ones are most important, and then send them out to the right people to take them. But this is a different model than a lot of the ones that have been discussed today that tend to be more the storytelling and story making processes happening together, whereas newsrooms are acting independently within this larger network for us.
We have about more than 60 stations working with us as part of America Amplified, and that makes the coordination very, very tricky. We have spreadsheet about engagement, spreadsheet about the resulting journalism and how they connect, and we're trying to track that all the time. But part of the issue, it's a wonderful question, because really it comes down to who's deciding what's the story, who's deciding what is the right thing. And we truly believe we want those decisions to come from the local level. We want to help them have the tools to make the best decisions about what that coverage will be. But we are not it's a coalition of the willing in so many ways. And so we're watching to see what gins up, because we are doing national reporting. We're actually doing a rural community reporting project right now. We have a few others we're thinking about, but it's so funny because when we started this, everybody wanted to know, well, what are you going to produce? What is that story? What is that thing you're going to do? And we had to say, hold on, we don't know. We don't know till the reporters on the ground or in the small digital space tell us what are those needs and aspirations, and where should we focus our energy at a national level, so that the local goes to the regional to the national. But that makes it very messy, and it's a much easier thing to say, okay, we've decided we want to focus on such and such. We'll take whatever stories you want to do on that, or we'll assign that. We do sometimes ask, we'll have an idea we think is something, and we'll go to all these partners and say, anybody doing anything on this, could we connect the dots in this way? But it's a very distributed, kind of messy, collaborative effort in that way. Yeah, it's fun in a lot of ways, but it's also challenging.
Well, and I think that all of this speaks to the fact that there's so many different ways to do collaborations, right? So, and I think later on today, I believe there's a session all about sort of creating memoranda of understanding. Some collaborations require those, some don't. It really depends. There's a huge spectrum, and I think there's a lot of room for figuring out what you want to do based on what your own interests are and what the interests of your partners are. But that's why it's so important to have those conversations up front, even if you don't know the answer. But even asking the questions like, is this what we're doing? Is this not what we're doing? All of those things are really important to talk about up front. And yes, somebody just put in the chat about governance.
If I might add, we're working with 8 collaborations. We have 8 different agreements structured to each of them, and we're giving them a lot of money, because a lot of what we do is flowing the funds from CPB through to these groups. It was a long time figuring out what was it. Some people thought you should do one for the same thing, kind of. We have one part that's okay, as part of this, everybody agrees to do this, but here's what you say you want to do in your community, and what that deliverable might be. Yeah, but I'm a believer in work scopes or MOUs or whatever you might call it. Yeah.
All right, so we've got a little less than 10 minutes left and a couple questions left as well. This question comes from Linda Miller. She says that in the previous session, Lila Mills talked about the mistrust towards media that exists in communities who have experienced incomplete, inaccurate, and authentic narratives. The phrase, Shirley and Jackie are the Google of my neighborhood. Her question is, have you thought about how to collaborate and support the so-called Shirleys and Jackies of the community in combating misinformation? I asked that with the big caveat that I was not actually able to attend that previous session.
I think that when it at least comes to, we were looking at, communities, it was found recently, communities of color, Black and Latino were more affected by COVID-19. We began to look into the narratives of misinformation, possible disinformation that were within those communities. And we saw a lot of, fear drawing back to Henrietta Lacks as far as experimentation, things like that. And so to not trust medical authorities based on past experiences. I think that there's a hole and a data void when you talk to certain communities that don't feel. There are statistics on how people of color are treated when they go to receive treatment at a medical institution. There are statistics of not getting as great of treatment. We have that past of an actual conspiracy with Henrietta Lacks and Tuskegee. So to have incomplete information and something like that is really impeding people from, first of all, going to the hospital because they don't believe they will be cared for, and even thinking that any maybe vaccine or possible treatment will work. Then you have the result of people ending up looking for holistic remedies, fake cures, and things like that. So I think that, the way we address it is to, you have to tap into these communities. That's really important for them to understand that they are heard. And that's what we're doing currently.
All right, I'm trying to sneak in at least one more here. Charlotte Morgan asks, why is it so difficult to report the news around the election? As a reporter, you want to report whether the voters know what is at stake, and not all voters know their stuff. Many voters may not know who the candidates are running for judge in some counties. We've only got a couple minutes left, so we just ask folks to keep their answers.
Well, I'll attempt this, and I'll hear it from other folks too. But I think part of the issue is that it's not just one election, right? This is many different elections happening in many different places across the country. And it's actually more than just the general, right? There's all these different places having primaries. Some people are having elections that are not even just the primaries this year. They're having 3 elections because of off-season things that they're doing, whether it's governor races or whatever it is. So there's a lot going on this year. But I think for any community, you have to sort of look at it as, you know, what's happening in your community might not necessarily be what's happening elsewhere. And so trying to, you know, again, center the community that you're trying to serve is really important because it's not just one election. It's not this monolith of an election.
Sorry, I lost my unmute button there. And then just this, I'm gonna ask one more question. This one's a very specific question for Donna. What are the collaborating partners in the I-4 corridor?
Oh boy. Okay, you're going to test me. The New England News Collaborative up in the Northeast, their strategy is talk shows, and they've been doing a regional talk show with our America Amplified work that rotates around the region. We have State Impact Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, as I found, has also more collaboration there in public media than anywhere. A lot of people stepping up to the plate there. They're embedding reporters, a bunch of those stations. We hope embedding, we'll see. We're working through what that is. We're working with Ohio Valley Resource, which is a tremendous effort. The reporting in Appalachia is very important. We're looking at rural communities there, and that was supposed to be very event driven, so we're working on how to restructure that. I'm sorry, I'm going to go as fast as I can. Side Effects Public Media, which is in health, dealing with healthcare issues. Harvest Public Media, which is where I came into collaboration, and it's in the heartland. The problem with Harvest for us is that we're using the network of stations, which is across the Midwest, but we're not just focusing on agriculture and food issues. So it's a different kind of way to work through that collaboration. The Mountain West News Bureau, which is a whole bunch of great stations that don't get a lot of airplay necessarily in the Western US. There's WABE in Atlanta. That's where we're trying to figure out a strategy around reaching Black women in the South. And then the I-4 corridor project between Tampa and Orlando. Did I get a close? It's on the slides.
All right, I think that is about the time we have for this session. So thank you guys so much for joining. I was really thrilled to hear all of the awesome answers and look forward to diving into some of the resources in the chat that I haven't gotten a chance to look at yet. And thank you to the panelists for providing such incredible information about the work that they are doing.
Yes, thank you all so much. And I should have been using that slide even more. I love that happy little dancing bear, whatever it is.